לכל חפץ תחת השמיים, עת לולדת ועת למות, עת לצאת ועת לקור נטוע, עת להרוג ועת לרפוא, עת לפרוץ ועת לבנות, עת לבכות ועת לצחוק. There is a time for everything, a time for every experience under heaven, a time to celebrate being born, and a time to commemorate and mourn the passing of a beloved friend. Good morning. We're here today to mourn the loss of Nancy Livingston. And we know that she meant so much to so many of us here in this room. And as we'll talk about for so many minutes this morning, her imprint, her impact, her gift to all of us is truly profound and is unique in this community. My name is Cantor Liz Sachs. I'm the senior cantor here at Temple Emmanuel. And in our tradition, we use the words of our scriptures, we use the words of our liturgy to help us honor and remember the dear one who has passed away. And so this morning, we will move through a number of readings that express the range of emotions that I imagine we are all feeling this morning. We will cry. It is okay that we will likely laugh. We will smile. We will share memories with one another. And in that way, we will lift her spirit and maybe even feel her presence in this room. Ecclesiastes, who wrote the famous words that I opened with, "There is a time for every purpose under heaven," Ecclesiastes also wrote that the eye never has its fill of seeing. Young or old, when we depart this life, we never see enough of this world, never complete our task, and never cherish our loved ones quite enough before we are called home. And yet, we know that God is with us now, even with our broken hearts, because we know that we can share in the sentiment that whenever parting comes, it can feel too soon. And so we ask Adonai, our God, to console us at this moment, to be near to us when light seems so far away, and to sustain us until we feel time of healing. Our tradition uses the 23rd Psalm very frequently to help us bring comfort in this moment. And in this psalm, we talk of a peaceful place, a place where we hope our loved ones go when they pass away, a place of comfort, a place of rest, a place where perhaps they can watch over us with pride and joy and know that we miss them but can continue to walk. And so we use these words to create pastoral comfort for us, and we hope for their soul as well. And so we will chant the words of Psalm 23, and then I'll read them in English. And I know that it's a psalm that is cherished in many different traditions. And so if you are familiar with the words, you are welcome to say them with me. Psalm 23. Adonai roi lo echsar bin hodesh asher yarbitzeini al mei menuchot al mei menuchot yadnaleni nafshi yeshovev yeshovev yancheni v'maglei tzedek yancheni v'maglei tzedek lemon shemo gam ki elech begeit salmavet lo irora ki ata imadi shiftecha umishantecha hema yanachamuni ta'aroch lefanai shulchan neged tzorarai dishanta v'shemen roshi kosi revaya ach tov v'chesed yudefuni kol yemei chayai kol yemei chayai v'shavti bevei Adonai leyorech yamim Adonai roi lo echsar Adonai roi lo echsar. We read together, Adonai is my shepherd, I shall not want. God makes me lie down in green pastures, leads me beside still waters, and restores my soul. You lead me in right paths for the sake of your name. Even when I walk in the valley of the shadow of death, I shall fear no evil, for you, O God, are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You have set a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You have anointed my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of God forever. Just as we honor Nancy with words from our tradition, we also honor her with our memories, with the stories that we have shared. And so we are going to hear from people in her life who knew her very, very well. I know that for Nancy, that's a particularly hard category to close off. And we probably could hear from almost everyone sitting in this room today about a very special story, about a time that Nancy was kind, comforting, warm, helpful, witty, impactful. But we'll hear from very special people today. We are going to first call, of course, on her daughter, Julie. And then we will hear from Julia Agazio, Dr. Jeannie Abrams, and Dr. Hilary Baskin. Julie?
nice to see you all. My mother liked a lot of things. She liked art, music, shopping, chocolate, football, but mostly she liked people. And she was good at a lot of things. But the thing that she did the best, like automatically, effortlessly, constantly, was make friends. And if I ever went with her anywhere, no matter like how far, how weird, how outside of one of our comfort zones, if I left her alone for 5 minutes, when I came back, she introduced me to her new friend. And they were probably going to have lunch, and it was likely going to be ice cream or lobster, if any of you know her. Pretty much everybody I ever talked to about my mom had some story about something kind or funny or uniquely Nancy that she had done to set herself apart as a person who was different in the best kind of a way. And I always loved hearing those stories, so I figured maybe you guys would like to hear some of them too.
Hello, my name is Julia Agazio. And Nancy and I were great good friends and also worked together at Hanson Elementary School in Commerce City, Colorado. Nancy came on in '92 to a school that had never seen a force like Nancy Livingston. That is for certain. And she was the learning coordinator, and within that, she handled the gifted and talented children. And in Adams 14, those kids were often overlooked. They didn't have a voice, and Nancy decided they were going to have a voice, because that's what she did. She gave people voice. So, luckily, my daughter Amanda was in that group, but she started with plays. They'd read the plays, then they'd act out the plays. And, you know, a lot of the teachers around were like, this is really different, you know, but that's Nancy. So then, not long after, Nancy decided that the children of Commerce City needed to get culture. So she put together, of course she had all kinds of pushback, but she coordinated a field trip for the upper grades, I do believe, to go to the symphony. And everybody was in shock. It's like, yeah, we don't do that here. And Nancy's like, oh, we do now. Yeah, we do now. And so, she, you know, I mean, she had to coordinate the buses. She had to talk everybody into it. Then she had to teach the kids that they had to be dressed up, and they had to be quiet, and they had to stay together. And all the teachers were like, we're going to the symphony, you know. But it was one of the greatest days in our school history, and they went to the symphony and saw Peter and the Wolf. And I mean, most of those children had never been to a movie theater, let alone a symphony. But that was Nancy. Nancy would see something and she'd go for it in her sweet, quiet, loving way. She would never raise her voice, but Nancy would get what she wanted in the end. That's just how she was. And, you know, a lot of people didn't know how to take Nancy because she wouldn't stop it. No. No meant nothing to her. She just continued on. And so a lot of people were, you know, they just saw her funny in a different light because they're like, well, we're used to doing this. And she said, well, I'm not, and this is how it's going to be. And thank goodness the principal supported her. Her and I worked together a lot because the principal was out doing a lot of other things, so her and I ran the school. And the kids always wanted to see Nancy because Nancy was a disciplinarian, but she was so loving. And she'd always start with, like she does with everybody, with a compliment or a sweet thing to say, and then they'd get it. But Nancy, they felt safe with her, and they always wanted to go to her office. You know, they didn't want to go to the principal's office. We want to go to her office. But that was just Nancy, and she was a force to be reckoned with. She was adventurous, gracious, kind, intelligent beyond belief. She had empathy for everyone, and it didn't matter what their walk in life was, because Nancy just had this natural, like, spring of empathy for everyone. And she, Flo and I were talking the other day, and like she said, she never had an unkind word to say about anybody. She always found the positive. She would spin it. If you were in a bad mood, she'd think of something that happened or that you were going to do to get you out of it. It was just Nancy's way. She was such a positive, bright, shining star in the world of human beings, and I just can't believe that she's not here, like all of us. But at least it was a quiet, sweet death, we hope. Nancy loved her family. Julie, John, the kids. You were her whole life, of course. She loved the Broncos. She was Bronco crazy. I was just reading through some old emails, and it was always, come join me, we're having pizza, we're going to see the Broncos, we're going to cheer our terrible team on, but Nancy would never say that. But she loved traveling, she loved art, she loved culture. We went to Mexico several times together, and she loved Puerto Vallarta and the Malecón. And there was a particular gallery there that Nancy loved, and if you travel with Nancy Livingston, you know that you were going to art galleries. Yeah. And art galleries, and art galleries, and museums, and jewelry stores. Those were her favorite places. And so, we'd been there 3 days. I'd been to many, many of these things, but we ended up at the Galleria Uno, which was her favorite in Puerto Vallarta. And she'd been there several times. But there was this particular bird that stood about 4 feet tall that was all metal. It was it was welded, and it tipped. And she just wanted that bird, and I think she'd been there several times to get that bird. But so this time I'm doing something just to kill time, because it's my 5th museum. But so she's over talking to the curator, and they're working something out. Well, somehow they worked out a deal. And so Nancy was just so happy she was finally getting her bird. So I leave her, she's doing her stuff, and I come back, go to leave, and she has no shoes on. So I says, Nancy, where are your shoes? She says, well, she liked my shoes so much, and she said if I gave her my shoes, that she'd take care of the shipping, so I gave her my shoes. And I'm like, okay, I guess we got to go back to the hotel and get you some shoes. So, and shipping a giant metal bird from Puerto Vallarta, I don't know. But when we walked out, she says, I got their shoes for next to nothing at Ross Dress for Less. and we rarely spat, but Nancy, when she wanted something, she was persistent. And we were in Buenos Rios, which is another little town she loved, and somebody had told her that there was some kind of art gallery there. And Nancy was intent on finding that art gallery. Well, if you've ever been to Buenos Rios, the town looks like half of it's blown up from war, and there's men walking around with machine guns. And we all day were looking for a moon, something with a moon. And so she asked the little girl, she's probably 12, and she says, if I give you money, will you take me there? And the little girl says, yeah, I know where it is, in her Spanish or whatever. And so we start walking with her, and the little girl's going like this. And she's taking us down this street that's completely blown up. It's all rubble. And I said, you know what, Nancy? I'm not going down that street. I have children. I want to get back to those children, and I'm not going down there. She says, come on, because Nancy had no fear whatsoever. And I said, no, I am not going down. You can go yourself. I'm not going down that street. So she turned around, and we ended up having lunch. And at the end of the day, we found that place, which was nowhere down that blown up street. But Nancy, she just trusted everyone, and she's like, it'll work out. And I said, no. And that was one of the only times that we ever had a tiff, because she was arguing with me, and I said, no, I'm not going down there. But my daughter, Amanda, was in her gifted and talented group, and Nancy considered her protege for life. She always told me that. And she introduced me and my family and my children and so many other children to the cultures. I had never been to the Buell Theater. I had never been to the symphony. I had never done any of those things. And if it wasn't for Nancy, I would have never gone. And so she enriched so many people's lives and changed their lives for the better. That it's just incredible. And wherever she ends up, it'll be a better place for Nancy being in it, because her positive, sweet, loving attitude is just, it was infatuating. You couldn't get away from Nancy. We were at lunch last Wednesday, and like you said, a lady comes up to her and says, Nancy? And they ended up talking for like an hour. But it was a friend of Perla's. And everywhere where you went, somebody knew Nancy, and she would stop everything. And she would make you feel like you were the only person in the world. And that was a gift that Nancy had. And I'm gonna try and be more like Nancy that way, because she always made you feel like you were so important and so special. I love you, Nancy Livingston. And my life is so much better because you were in it. I'm gonna miss you forever. Thank you.
Well, after that, there's not much left, is there? But I'm going to try. Nancy had so many wonderful attributes. I'm just going to try to focus on 3. First, it came across in your talk as well, it was her zest for life. Nancy loved people. She loved learning. She took classes all the time. I was with her at many lectures. She always had a notebook where she took notes and then reviewed them when she came home. I was happy to be out of school. I wasn't going to do that anymore, but Nancy always did that. She loved good food. She loved the theater, music. You talked about the symphony, sports. We always had to schedule the Livingston lecture around the Bronco game to make sure. The first thing she always asked me, not who the speaker was, but did I clear to make sure it wasn't a day that the Broncos were playing. And of course, she had a spiritual side too, but full of energy all the time. And even when she had some health issues along the way, she always said, but I'm going to be better, and I'm doing the therapy and X, Y, and Z. So that was one thing. Something that really stands out was her spirit of generosity. And I know we all know myriad organizations that she supported and donated to, but it was also people. And one story that really kind of blew my mind, when she sold her house on Columbine, there was a young couple who was looking at the house. They could not afford the market price, and she sold it to them, I think, for at least $100,000, less than the price or more. And she told me because she wanted to help them buy their first home, people that I presumably had never met before in her life. And then you also alluded to this, her deep respect and empathy for people. You know, today, inclusivity is a buzzword that we hear constantly, but often is just lip service. For Nancy, it applied to every single person she met. She had respect. She'd introduce me to a delivery person and say, this was my friend, hear this. Every person, no matter what their background or walk of life. And I think, we mentioned this too, Nancy was a very talented, accomplished early childhood educator, but once she retired, I think she made friendship her career. And so no one yesterday, I received a call from a woman I've never heard of, I don't know her. She said, I'm a friend of Nancy, a new friend of Nancy Livingston's. I heard she passed away. I didn't know how to get in touch with anyone, but she mentioned your name to me several times. And she says, I have COVID and I can't, and she sounded horrible, I can't attend the funeral, but could you give me some information? And I did, and it's no one I ever knew. And she said, Nancy and I were going to have lunch next Friday. So that was true. So she really touched all of our lives, continued to do so. Of course, she adored her husband, John, adored Julie, and I personally was very privileged to have both John and then Nancy in my life for over 40 years. So we take comfort in the fact that she, as I said, touched so many lives in so many positive ways.
Dr. Hilary Baskin and Rabbi Elliot Baskin.
We met Nancy because she was our son's teacher. At Denver Jewish Day School, no child is average. Every child is talented, gifted, and special. Very special. Just ask their parents. Luckily for us, we had a child who got to be one of the seven most special of all the second and third graders. Yes, he tested well, and yes, he is now a newly minted environmental attorney from an Ivy League school. But I told you he was special. But he was special because he got to be with the best, the brightest, and the most innovative that the school had. He was chosen to have an enrichment poetry class with Nancy Livingston. And in third grade, that same year, he had his first crush with an older woman. It wasn't me. It was the most creative woman in his universe, Nancy Livingston. He wrote his first love poem to her, and she cherished it without embarrassing or humiliating him. He also wrote an ode to onions, so she could keep things in perspective. Did I mention he was in second or third grade? An ode to onions? This is the impact she had on him. She had a way of mentoring our child like few others, and their love for each other spanned decades. Mrs. L would have her students for tea parties in her garden. They would have visits with Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr. Livingston, I presume. For those of you that don't know, that's her dog. And no, I didn't need to ask Julie to remember the name correctly. It too has been part of our family for decades. When Jonah learned that there was a lecture in memory of John Livingston, he insisted we drive him. Not only because it was going to be on a fascinating topic, even for an elementary, middle, or later high schooler, but because it was a Livingston lecture. He knew he would leave having learned something new, and for him, equally as importantly, get a few precious minutes with his beloved Mrs. L. After he left for college, we continued to go as adults because it was the Livingston lecture. She introduced me to other retired and semi-retired teachers who helped us navigate enrichment and summer programs. Mrs. L came to his bar mitzvah, congratulated Jonah at his graduation, and would make time to visit when he was home from university. She was interested in his life, maybe as much as his own grandparents who lived so far away. She filled in and became a surrogate. She made him feel special, and he was not the only student, as we've heard, that had this decades-long relationship with a teacher. So few of us have. He only had her a few days a week for a couple of years. When he was in college, she would email him interesting articles, and he was respectful, but would disagree and challenge her, especially on her Israel politics. Watching their interaction and their relationship was nothing short of stunning. How many young people have a teacher, a mentor, and a first crush from elementary school through adulthood? How many of us have this opportunity in our entire lives? How many teachers become friends with their students' parents, inviting them to their daughter's documentary premiere years after the student had been in the class, or introducing them to the artist Pink through their daughter? How many teachers can touch so many with a seamless, effortless manner and have so much obvious fun doing so? All of us sitting here are talented, gifted, and special. We are very special. Nancy Livingston has added poetry and enrichment to our lives. Jonah had a writing assignment in enrichment class to include idioms and similes. First or second or third grade again, mind you. He chose to make a gift to his favorite teacher.
And so, a poem for Mrs. Livingston on her birthday by Jonah. I'm a student at Herzl Day School. This year I have a teacher who is really cool. She makes our brains work very hard, and Mrs. Livingston is a real card.
Idiom.
We never get bored in Miss Livingston's room. It makes time go by fast, vroom. With Mrs. S, she makes a great team. Enrichment seems like a magnificent dream.
Simile.
Personifications, idioms, and similes too. With Mrs. L, there's so much to do. Enrichment makes the time fly.
Idiom.
And I'm happy to tell you why. Enrichment time is truly the best. Mrs. Livingston's teaching beats the rest. Math, Hebrew, and writing are fun, yes they are, as long as I know enrichment is not far.
Idiom.
She always wears smiles and has lots of files, plays that contain, I cannot complain, for they are fun for everyone. Punctuation she loves by and by. Miss a period does she cry. We always run late, but that I can't hate. Enrichment is fun. Ms. Livingston's #1. Ms. Livingston, I hope you have a happy birthday. May everything you wish for come your way. My favorite idiom is, teachers touch the future. Mrs. L not only touched the future, she hugged the future. And we are all blessed to have such a giving, loving master teacher in our lives. And when she goes to the Yeshiva Shalmala, to the academy on high, you will be sure that besides the Rabbinu Shalom, besides the master of all creation, she'll be at the right-hand side, giving special talks for the gifted and talented.
Eloheinu Elohei Avotenu v'imotenu, our God and God of our ancestors, you who heal the brokenhearted and grant comfort and consolation to all of us who mourn. We ask that on this day, you help us fill our lives with the acts of loving kindness and truth, which serve as the genuine memorial to our dear beloved Nancy. And so we shall know that the deep bond of love that we all have for her will remain unbroken. And together we say, Amen. We have heard so beautifully here today about what a gifted teacher Nancy was. And I think we all know that that designation of teacher went so far beyond a profession for her. It was the way she lived, and it was the way she loved. It was the entire frame of how she approached the world. In the Talmud, the designation of teacher is the hardest designation to attain. Only cherished rabbis become teachers, morenu, rabbeinu. There is an acknowledgement that that lens on how you live is unique and comes only with very special people. Now, I did not have as much of a chance to get to know Nancy as many of you. I'm still relatively new here in Denver, only here for 12 years, so I have about 45 years to go before I became considered a Denverite. But it was really clear that that is how she lived, even from the few interactions that I had with her. Whether it was a beautiful expression of gratitude shared in the aisle of the sanctuary during the high holy days that seemed to encapsulate so perfectly exactly what we were trying to accomplish, because she knew and could see and could validate, because that's how she would want to share with other people. Or whether it was because I could watch her during services, sitting in the sanctuary, talking for most of the services to the people around her. And that's okay. That's really okay. Because I know what she was saying to the person in front of her and behind her and to the right and to the left. She was sharing. She was sharing the insights and the love and the connection that she felt to the tradition, because it bubbled out so much that she needed to make that connection. And as clergy, we are privileged. We are privileged to watch people walk in and out of our sanctuary and witness important moments in their lives and witness where they are in their arc. And Nancy was never alone. She was always with someone. And that was such a beautiful blessing to see. To see that she was able to fulfill her own life that way, but also clearly reach out to others who might have been alone were it not for Nancy. And that was glorious to behold. One of the things you shared with me yesterday, Julie, was that some of this frame on the world about being an eternal teacher was reinforced and validated by the process of adopting you. And knowing, of being adopted herself, and knowing that she could internalize that blood was not thicker than water, but rather love was thicker than blood, and that she sought it every single moment and lived it and brought it to other people. That's a hard truth to want to share out loud at this moment in time. To want to be able to share that experience with others and bring the lens and that frame to other people during that time frame, that took a lot of courage. And I think the buildup of that courage was really part of what helped her create the networks that she had. There's a Hasidic story about a teacher who is about to pass out of this world. And at that moment, the teacher calls out to one of her students. And she says, "Look out the window and tell me what you see." And the student says, "I see a street, and I see cars, and I see a dog that is playing in front of this house." And the teacher says, "Thank you so much." And then the teacher calls a second student into her room and says, "Look out the window and tell me what you see." And the second student says, "I see people walking by and chatting with each other, and I see clouds in the sky, and I see the sun shining so brightly." And the teacher says, "Thank you." And that student leaves the room. And then the teacher calls the youngest pupil in and says, "Look out the window and tell me what you see." And the youngest pupil looks out that window and says, "I see divine presence everywhere. I see people walking who are touched by God, and I see a world created by glowing divine light." And it is at that moment that the teacher knows that her work is done, that there is perspective that is going to be given to the next generation by a soul that is similar to hers. That is how Nancy walked around. Yes, she loved people and she loved making friends, but it was so much more than that for her because she saw spirit to spirit, soul to soul, and wanted nothing more than to lift it and therefore bring about God's love and God's light into this world. There was a radiance around her, and we honor that, and we mourn the loss of that light at this time. But we know that when we take a little bit of what she taught us with us, we carry on her light. In just a moment, we are going to chant the memorial prayer. And there's an ancient tradition that when someone who was a great woman passes away, we use the words "imi morati" in the memorial prayer, which means we mourn for the passing of our mother and our teacher. I could not think of a more appropriate tradition to lift Nancy's spirit. And so with that in our minds and that in our hearts, I ask you all now to rise as you are able, to stand as we chant the memorial prayer. El Malay Rachamim Shochen Bamromim Hamsei Menucha Nechona Tachat Kanfei Ashchina Im Kedoshim Udorim Kezor Harakia Mazhirim Et Nishmat Et Nishmat Imenu Morinu Yakireinu Shahalacha Leolama Borachamim Yastireya Besete Kenafav Leolamim V'yitzror mitzror hachayim et nishmatav Adonai hu nachalata v'tanuach b'shalom al mishkava v'nomar amen. May the source of life, the fountain of all being, open our hearts to compassion and our eyes to wisdom, that we might glimpse in perfect peace and sadness the way of all things. May Nancy's memory be for us a blessing, and may we never let the light of her love grow dim in our hearts. May we remember all her worthy and righteous deeds, that her memory be forever bound up in the bond of life. God is our source and our destination, our beginning and our end. And may Nancy's death remind us always of this truth, that the bond of love we shared and continue to share will never be severed in sorrow. May she rest in peace. And together we say, Amen. The psalmist has written that weeping may tarry into the night, but joy comes in the morning. El Malei Rachamim, O God full of compassion, please send your comfort to all of us here who grieve. Help us to dispel the sadness that accompanies the pain of this loss and to find joy in the precious memories of Nancy. May your love inspire us all to focus on the love we have had for her and that she had for all of us. Help us to face the future with courage to treasure Nancy's wonderful legacy. Sustain us in our faith, O God, even as in this troubling time, as you have sustained our people in times of trouble and sorrow throughout the generations. Baruch atah Adonai, blessed are you, Adonai, who provides comfort to those who are brokenhearted. Amen. This concludes our service here at Temple Emmanuel. We will continue to Emmanuel Cemetery, and Maggie's going to come and explain how that will work in just a moment. I want to make sure to lift, because not all of you may join us at the graveside, that the family will be observing Shiva today from 3 to 7 at Nancy's home, and on Sunday from 3 to 7 at Nancy's home, with a minyan at 6 o'clock each evening. And we have Shiva information on cards right outside. If you didn't get to pick one up on the way in, you can certainly pick one up on the way out. Okay.
Thank you all so much for being here today. As Cantor Sachs just said, up next we are going to have the interment at Emmanuel Cemetery, which is the Jewish section of Fairmount Cemetery. I'm going to ask for you all to remain in your seats as we escort the casket and the family to their vehicles. If you wish to join us at Emmanuel Cemetery, you can certainly try to follow the hearse and the family vehicle, but of course obeying all traffic laws. You'd be surprised. And of course, as Cantor said, if not, there is Shiva happening this afternoon as well as on Sunday. So yes, please go ahead, stay in your seats as we escort the family. And then after they're done, if you're coming to the cemetery, proceed to your vehicles quickly and just wait for us to leave.